Hey guys, what's up? It's the Brain here, and today I'm going to be doing part 3 of the Boomsday Project card review. Today we have 32 more cards to review, so I'm going to try and go a little bit faster through some of the cards that aren't as good and talk a little bit more about the cards that are good. That way this video doesn't get too long. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the first card. So the first card we have here is Missile Launcher, 6 mana 4/4 magnetic. At the end of your turn, deal 1 damage to all their characters. So I'm going to go ahead and say this card is not very good. Stat-wise, it's pretty underwhelming. It does have magnetic, so you can, buff one of your minions. It has a Baron-Geddon-esque effect, but dealing 1 damage to all characters as opposed to 2 damage to all characters is a pretty big difference. There's a lot less minions that are going to die to it. So I think for that reason, it's not going to be very strong. So I'm going to give this one a 2.0. Next card up, we have Academic Espionage. Shuffle 10 cards from your opponent's class into your deck. They cost 1. So this is a rogue card, and this is kind of going with the new rogue theme that Blizzard seems to be pushing, which is playing cards from your opponent's classes. Um, Unfortunately, the more and more Blizzard tries to push rogue in that direction, rogue still stands firm in being either an aggressive deck like Odd Rogue or a Miracle Rogue deck. This card does not really fit in either one of those, obviously. The This effect is like pretty interesting. I don't think it's going to be a very strong card just because it's pretty inconsistent, but it does have the potential to like give you like some pretty insane cards, like for example, a 1 mana Ultimate Infestation or a 1 mana Lay on Hands or like a 1 mana Volcano. You can get some really powerful cards from 1 mana, but there's also a lot of underwhelming cards that you can get. Uh, so I think because of the high variability of this card, it's not going to be very strong, and because it doesn't really fit in any of other rogues classes, it's not going to be very strong. I think this is mostly going to be a fun card to play with, if you're playing a test gray main deck. But other than that, don't see it being competitive. So I'm going to have to give this one a 2.0 as well. Next up, we have Crystal Smith Kangor, 2 mana 1/2 Divine Shield Lifesteal. Your healing is doubled. So this card looks like it's a good card, but I think it's actually not as good as it seems. The stat wise, 2 mana 1/2 is pretty underwhelming. It does have Divine Shield, so a little bit better. It has Lifesteal, which I don't think is very good on a card that's only has 1 power and comes down on turn 2. Uh, the thing is with this card is, early game, yeah, you can be gaining 2 life off of it, but early game you're probably going to be at full health, so you really won't be gaining life off of it. Late game, it doubles your health, so you can pair it with, say, like Lay on Hands to gain you an additional 8. But that's still kind of underwhelming because this card's just going to sit in your hand for so long. When you have a 2-cast card, you want to play it out as fast as possible. And Paladin doesn't really have a ton of healing. So I just don't think this card's going to be that good. So I'm going to have to give this one a 2.5. Next up, we have Cosmic Anomaly. 4 mana 4/3 spell damage +2. So you can tell they're really trying to push the spell damage thing with Mage. The other card that this brings to mind is Kobold. I forget what it was. It's a 4 mana 2/2 that also spell damage +2. It's a neutral. But yeah, this card's obviously very much better. It has +2 attack and +1 defense. I think this card is actually pretty good. I think Mage needs some beefier minions, some stuff to play in the mid game. And also you can pair this card with stuff like Arcane Missiles. There's a new card coming out, 1 mana, deal 1, and 1 damage to adjacent characters as well. I think it's going to be the next card. So, being able to play this down on turn 5 with an additional 1 mana spell card, I think it's going to be, pretty powerful. So I think this card will probably be played Tempo Mage. I'm going to have to give it a 3.0. And speaking of that card we just mentioned, Shooting Star, 1 mana, deal 1 damage to a minion and to the minions next to it. So this card is just on the surface, it looks kind of underwhelming because when you compare it to a card like Arcane Explosion, which is 2 mana, deal 1 damage to all enemy minions, this card seems a lot worse. But I think the mana difference is actually going to play a pretty important role here. The difference between 1 and 2 mana is like gigantic. It's the difference between being able to fit this card in your turn or not. And especially with the other card we just saw, Cosmic Anomaly, I think these two are going to be best friends. Being able to plop down an Anomaly and then deal 3 damage to 3 different minions on turn 5, that's extremely powerful. So I'm going to have to give this card a 3.0. I think it's pretty efficient and pretty good. Next up, we have Zarek, Master Cloner. 6 mana 5/5, Death Rattle. If you cast any spells on this minion, resummon it. So, I don't think this card is that great. You know, it stat-wise, it's kind of underwhelming. 6 mana 5/5, yeah, we could do better than that. But you have to cast spells on it. Right now, Priest doesn't have that many cards that, fit into... Priest doesn't have that many cards where, like, it's already happy playing stuff that casts spells on minions. Obviously, Power Word Shield is one that comes to mind. We also have Divine Spirit and Inner Fire, as well as a few others. But they're not very good outside of Combo Priest. I just don't think this guy's going to fit in Combo Priest. What Combo Priest wants to do is, it just wants to make a gigantic minion and kill your opponent in one turn, and try and contest the board as much as possible to not fall behind. This doesn't really do any of it. This is more of a distraction. You don't want to use your combo pieces on this guy just to resummon it for value. So I don't think this guy is going to be very good. I'm going to have to give it a 2.5. Next up, we have Shrinkray. 5 mana. Set the attack and health of all minions to 1. This card is very good, I think. The first thing that I think a lot of people think of is, oh, maybe Control Paladin can come back. We already saw the 2 mana 1/2 with Lifesteal, double your health, or sorry, double your healing. And now we have Shrinkray, a new pseudo AoE type card. Well, I'm sorry to say, I don't think this is a Control Paladin card. I think this is more of an Odd Paladin card. Right now, what Odd Paladin really struggles with are giant minions and board wipes. So, for example, when you're playing against Even Lock, and your opponent drops, big Twilight Drakes and Mountain Giants, you're kind of left with a awkward decision. Either you can just go face and hope they don't have AoE, which is pretty unlikely since they run 2 Hellfire and 2 Defile and they're tapping every turn, or you can trade into their Mountain Giant and Twilight Drake, but you're going to lose the whole board, and then they're just going to keep playing out minions, and it's going to be hard to push through those final points of damage. I think Shrinkray solves a lot of that. You can just shrink down a Mountain Giant, Twilight Drake, just get good trades in. It's kind of like a Sunkeeper Terram-esque type of effect. It's also really good against Druid, because Odd Paladin goes wide, you can get punished by Spreading Plague. And right now, a lot of the Odd Paladin builds are running Void Ripper just for that reason, just to combat the Spreading Plague. Shrinkray is going to be another more flexible way to be able to combat Spreading Plague and also combat Even Lock, 2 of Paladin's worst matchups. So I think this card is going to be included in Odd Paladin, maybe as a 1 of, maybe it's really strong, it might be a 2 of. We'll see, but I think this card is very good. I'm going to have to give it a 3.5. Next up, we have Myra Rod Spring. It's a 5 mana 4/2 battle cry. Discover a Death Rattle minion, also gain its Death Rattle. It's a pretty interesting minion. I think the first thing that comes to mind for some people is, is this the new Azure Drake? Can we just play this in any rogue deck? Can we just jam this in Odd Rogue? Can we just jam this in Miracles? I think the answer is maybe, but probably not. I was looking over the Death Rattle pool, and there are just so many Death Rattles. There are some pretty good rogue Death Rattles. There's a 6 mana, I think 5/3 with Rush, Death Rattle, get a combo. There's also Sherazin. Both of these cards are decent because rogues are always going to run combo effects. And Sherazin's just a decent minion on its own. Plus, you're a lot more likely to see rogue minions come up in the Discover pool than neutral minions. So I think that's pretty good. That's something going for it. But I'm not sure if this is going to be good enough. Right now, Odd Rogue has other 5-drops like Cobalt Scalebane, Captain Greenskin, Leroy Jenkins, Fungal Mancer. Some really strong 5-drops that it has to compete with. And a 5 mana 4/2 is just not very strong on the board, although it does provide a little bit more gas. So I'm a little unsure about this card. I think it's kind of medium in power level, but not super great. I'm going to have to give it a 3.0. Next up, we have Voltaic Burst. 1 mana, summon 2 1/1 sparks with Rush, Overload 1. So the first thing that comes to mind is this is kind of like a Lost in the Jungle type of effect, and we all know Lost in the Jungle is very good, especially because Paladin has those synergies. Well, Voltaic Burst, I think, is a little bit worse than Lost in the Jungle. You still get 2 1/1s, but you have to pay Overload for 1, and they gain Rush. I don't think the Rush ability is just going to be all that relevant. If they gain Charge and you could deal 2 damage to face immediately, well then, maybe the Overload 1 is Rush it. But just getting 2 1/1s that you can attack with immediately, that's going to be pretty underwhelming unless you already have like a Flame Tongue Totem or a Direwolf Alpha out. And those cards are really only played in Even Shaman, which can't play Voltaic Burst. There's not really a mid-range Shaman out right now. So I don't think this card is going to be very good. I think it's a little bit underwhelming. I'm going to have to give it a 2.5. Next up, we have Juicy Psych Melon. 4 mana, draw a 7, 8, 9, and 10 cost minion from your deck. You know, it just seems like they're just trying to push Big Druid more and more and more, and I'm not quite sure why. I think Druid already has plenty of tools. It doesn't need more. I think this card is very strong. You know, if you've played Mally Druid or you've played Big Druid, you'll notice a lot of times, you know, in the turn 4, turn 6 area where Druid doesn't really have a whole lot to do. It's usually playing Branching Pass or like clearing the board. But when it plays Branching Pass, it's not gaining armor, it's trying to draw cards. Well, this is going to be kind of like an upgrade for that because this is automatically going to be able to find you, a Mally Ghost if you want it, a Master Oakheart if you want it. You know, if you're playing cards like Deathwing, it can find you Dragon Catcher. At 8, we have Primordial Drake. At 7, we have the new 7 mana 4/4, which we'll get to in a minute. You don't even have to play all of those. You can just play this just to find Master Oakheart if you want, or just to find Malygos and maybe get an extra value minion along the way. I think this card's very strong. I think there's also another card interaction, Dollmaster Dorian, I think is the card name. I think it's a 5 mana 2/6 whenever you draw a card. Summon a 1/1 copy of it. I think it's a little bit cheesy, you know, probably won't be competitive, but you think about it, if you play the Dollmaster and Psych Mill in the same turn, you can get Malygos out, you know, into play immediately, as well as any other minions you want, like a Lich King, or, Lich King and Malygos are the only ones that come to mind right now, but that can be pretty interesting. I think this card's really good. I'm going to have to give it a 3.5. Next up, we have Power Word Replicate. 5 mana pre-spells. Choose a friendly minion, summon a 5/5 copy of it. This card might seem like it's decent, but I think in reality, most of the time, Faceless Manipulator is going to be better. A lot of times when you're copying a minion, you want its stats, not its effect. Mostly because, you know, a lot of minions' effects come from their battle cry, you know, maybe from the Death Rattle, but if you're copying a cheap minion's Death Rattle to just get a 5/5 copy of it, that's not that exciting. The other side that this card has, other advantage this card has over Faceless is you can reduce the cost of it with Radiant Elemental. At which point, if you're trying to go for that, Vivid Nightmare is going to be a better option, just because you can get the combo off with Valen at a more efficient rate. So I don't think this card's very good. I'm going to give it a 2.0. Next up, we have Augmented Alec. 3 mana 3/4. Whenever you shuffle a card into your deck, shuffle in an extra copy. So this card's kind of scary. It's kind of scary because of Nerubian Weblord, or whatever the 4 mana 4/4 that shuffles 3 spiders into your deck. So with this card, it's going to shuffle, you know, additional copies into your deck, which is going to be, you know, pretty amazing because you can curve this turn 3 into turn 4 Nerubian. So I think immediately this card will automatically be played in Miracles. I'm not sure if it'll stick or not. It's a pretty powerful effect. This card also can combine with the new Rogue card that shuffles 10 copies into your deck. You know, there's also the Rogue card that shuffles 2 mana 3/2 that shuffles 3 more copies. I'm not really sure about Fatigue Rogue because Rogue doesn't have a lot of different elements, or sorry, a lot of defensive elements. You know, this card also works with Kingsbane. There's a lot of interactions with this card. I think this card's very powerful. It already has great stats. It has a pretty good effect. I think this card will definitely be played in some way, shape, or form. I think the question is, you know, how far can you take this combo? I think it's really good, though. I'm going to have to give it a 3.5. Next up, we have Necrium Blade. It's a 3 mana weapon, 3/2, Death Rattle. Trigger the Death Rattle of a random friendly minion. I'm not really sure why they're trying to push Death Rattle Rogue and also at the same time trying to push play cards from your opponent's class Rogue. Both of those aren't really good Rogue decks. I guess they're fun Rogue decks, but they're not that great. Triggering a friendly Death Rattle. Right now, there's not really any like great Death Rattle combos that you can get off besides Carnivorous Cube. And we all know that Rogue is not really a cube deck, but you know, with the inclusion of Necrium Blade, it might actually find a way to get some value out of cube. Because the best way to get advantage from cube is with cards like Play Dead and Dark Pack, you know, just cheap ways to pop it. But, you know, with Necrium Blade, you can play Necrium Blade on turn 3 and then you know, just leave it on 1 durability. And then on turn 6, you know, play the cube, pop it. You can get value from it immediately. So I think Necrium Blade, it already has decent stats. It has a pretty good ability. Death Rattle Rogue might not be the best strategy, but I think this card alone is pretty good. So I'm going to give it a 3.0. Alright, next up we have Thunderhead. 4 mana 3/5. After you play a card with Overload, summon 2 1/1 Sparks with Rush. So this card's already stat-wise is okay, slightly worse than Yeti. The effect, whenever you play Overload, gain 2 1/1 Sparks with Rush. So immediately, first thing that comes to mind is this card combos with the 1 mana summon 2 1/1 elementals, so you can kind of flood the board. Maybe get probably set up like a Bloodlust or something. I don't really think this is going to be a great strategy because right now mid-range Shaman just is it just isn't that great. There's aren't really that many great overload effects. I mean, you have like Feral Spirits, which is already like basically a worse Serenade Chain Gang. You have Lightning Bolt, which is somewhat cost efficient, but still not that great. You have Lightning Storm and Volcano, which are both AoEs, which don't really fit in mid-range Shaman type strategies. So I think the problem with Overload is it's just stretched across too many different types of archetypes. There's not enough like good mid-range sized Overload threats. Maybe if we still had Faceless 4 mana 7/7 with Overload, cards like that, this card might be better. But I think for right now, a lot of the Overload cards are like very underwhelming, so you're not going to want to play this card. But I think the card alone does have potential if they print better Overload cards. So for that reason, I think I'll give it a solid 3.0. Alright, next up we have Storm Chaser. It's a 4 mana 3/4, draw a spell from your deck that costs 5 or more. So I looked up the different spells you can get. You can either get Volcano, newly you can get Eureka, and now you can get Spellstone. You can also get Bloodlust, which is pretty good diversity. Unfortunately, you're probably not going to play any of these cards in combination with the exception of maybe Volcano being paired with Spellstone or Volcano being paired with Eureka. You probably won't play Bloodlust in the same deck as any of these other cards. So I don't think this is really going to tutor Bloodlust, and I think the reason for that is because when you play a card like Storm Chaser, you want to play more than 2 copies of spells that cost 5 or more. Or, I mean, maybe you might want to play it if you just only have 2 Volcanoes just to guarantee you draw that Volcano. But I think 3 is usually the sweet spot for the number of spells you want that cost 5 or more, just because you don't want to have a dead card, later on in the game. So I mean, and stat-wise, this card is decent. I don't know if I don't think it'll be played in Shutterwalk just because you only can get Volcanoes, but maybe in a new version of Eureka Shaman. Always being able to tutor up Eureka is pretty nice. So I think this card deserves a 3.0 as well. Next up, we have Replicating Menace. 4 mana 3/1 magnetic, death rattle summon 3/1/1 microbots, which I assume are mechs as well. Stat-wise, this card is similar to Eggnapper, which is 3 mana 3/1 summon 2 1/1s, and we all know that card's not very good. Increasing the cost by 1 and putting magnetic and getting additional microbot doesn't make this card like very much better. It is a mech, so it is a little bit more flexible going in mech decks, but I think we only will see this card being played when we discover it, not actually putting it into decks, so I'll have to give it a 2.0. Next up we have Security Rover, 6 mana 2/5 mech. Whenever this minion takes damage, summon a 2/3 mech with Taunt. This card reminds me a lot of the Big Hogger, 7 mana 6/6. Whenever it takes damage, get a 2/2 Taunt. This one gives you a 2/3 Taunt, costs 1 less. It has a lot worse stats though. The problem with a card like this is you spend 6 mana for a 2/5, and then what is your opponent going to do? They're just going to ignore it, and then you're going to get 1 attack with it, and it's going to get a 2/3 Taunt, and this guy's going to take damage. So I think for those reasons, it's not going to be very good. Obviously, you can combine it in a warrior deck that has like whirlwinds and stuff, but I think you're just working too much to summon a 2/3 mech. So I don't think this card's very good. I'll have to give it 2.0. Alright, next up we have Mecha Cthun. 10 mana 10/10, Death Rattle. If you have no cards in your deck, hand and battlefield, destroy the enemy hero. This is another fun type legendary that's not going to be competitive. There just isn't an easy way to get rid of all the cards in your hand and deck and battlefield. Sure, you have Cataclysm, which destroys cards in your hand and the battlefield, but you still have to fatigue yourself. And the other problem is, if you're going for a strategy that's trying to get rid of all of its resources, if they have some way to disrupt your combo at all, you basically lose the game, right? So because this card requires you to just go all in on destroying everything you have, and it's also hard to destroy everything you have, this card's obviously not very good. But it is a pretty fun casual card, so I guess we'll give it a 1.5 instead of a 1.0. Alright, next up, Necrean Vial. 5 mana. Trigger a friendly death rattle, or sorry, trigger a friendly minion's death rattle twice. So obviously the first thing that comes to mind is Carnivorous Cube. We already saw the weapon. Right now Rogue doesn't really have any value death rattle, so I think Cube is going to be the main thing. We could also see the, maybe Egg Rogue might become a thing. We've already seen Devilsaur Egg make its way into Hunter and become a tier 1 deck. It could do the same thing in Rogue. Triggering a death rattle twice is very powerful. But yeah, I mean, there's not much else to say. I'm not really sure what else there is besides Egg and Cube. That might be enough. Obviously, you have cards like Loot Hoarder and Blood Mage that you can run, but those are pretty underwhelming to trigger. This is in Rogue. It would be much better in other classes, so I think because it's in Rogue, it's not going to get such an amazing rating, so I'll get a 3.0. Excuse me. Alright, next up we have Dream Petal Florist. 7 mana 4/4. At the end of your turn, reduce the cost of a random minion in your hand by 7. And I've seen a lot of people think that this card's great. Obviously they're trying to push Big Druid more. We've already seen the 4 mana draw 7 costs 8, 9, and 10 minion, and you can play this alongside it. I don't think this card's very good, though. Stat-wise, very underwhelming. Effect-wise, I think it's also very underwhelming. It only can reduce the cost of an 8, 9, or 10. Reducing your Lich King from 8 to 7, who cares? Reducing Malygos 9 to 7, who cares? It just doesn't make that big of a difference. Druid doesn't have a lot of cheap spells to pair with stuff. I mean, it has Spellstones that you can fit in. You can cycle Wild Growth. You can fit in a hero power. But most of the time, Druid's just playing one giant minion a turn. And maybe if they're lucky, they have a mana open to play Spellstone. And this guy's not really going to help that much. So I'm going to have to give this guy a 2.0. I think it's pretty bad. But I could be wrong. I don't think this card's good, though. Next up, we have the Solarium. 1 mana, draw 3 cards. Alright, that's already pretty scary. At the end of your turn, discard them. I think the upside way outweighs the downside. I think the only downside with this card is that you can't play this in Blood Reaver Gul'dan in the same deck. I mean, you could, but you do run the risk of just discarding your Gul'dan. This card also can't really be played early. It's more of a mid-game card. Even if this is just 1 mana, draw 3, or sorry, 1 mana, look at the top 3, and you play one of those cards from that turn, well, now you're basically running tracking. But this card also has the upside of being able to cast all 3 cards. Let's say you're playing Zoo, for example, and you draw this card turn 10. You can just play it and just play all the threats that you draw. It's pretty powerful. Yeah, I mean, this card's very good. I don't know if it'll be played outside of Zoo. Obviously, can't be playing Even Lock. It's a little bit risky in Cube because you might discard your Gul'dan. But obviously, you don't have to cast Solarium, or if Gul'dan's already in your hand, you can still play it. So yeah, I think this card's extremely powerful. Just 1 mana for draw 3. I mean, that's just very good. We'll have to give it a 4.0. Next up, we have Arcane Dynamo. 6 mana, 3/4, Battlecry. Discover a spell that costs 5 or more. I was looking through all the cards that cost 5 or more that are spells, and unfortunately, there's a lot of poopy ones. I mean, there's the Druid one, where 5 mana, summon 2, 1/2 poisonous. There's a Warlock, which has 5 mana, deal 2, get a random demon if it destroys a minion. Some pretty underwhelming spells. And there's also pretty wide variability. I mean, there's a lot of different spells that cost 5 or more, so you're never going to get anything consistent. Plus, this is 6 mana for 3/4, so the stats are underwhelming. The ability is underwhelming. Yeah, I think this card's pretty bad. I'm going to have to give it a 1.0. Next up, we have Omega Mind. 2 mana, 2/3. If you have 10 mana crystals, your spells have Lifesteal this turn. So I don't think this card is that good. 2 mana, 2/3 in the early game is just very underwhelming. 2 mana, 2/3 in the late game with this ability is still underwhelming. Even if you pair this with the Volcano, this card is basically a Healing Rain, which, why not just play Healing Rain? Do you really need more Healing Rain effects? I mean, maybe if you're really dying for more healing, but I don't think Shaman really needs more than 2 Healing Rains. So I think this card's pretty bad. I'm going to have to give it a 1.5. Next up, we have EMP Operative. 5 mana, 3/3, destroy a mech. So unlike the other crab type effects like Olaka Crawler and Hungry Crab, this one costs 5 mana. This is more closer to Hemmet than it is to any of those effects. Looks like my camera just went out of focus. Alright, there it goes. So I think because this card costs 5, it's a lot worse, and it'll be a lot harder to include than the other crab type effects. We all know Himmet barely saw any play despite there being a decent number of beasts. Unless mechs become like a very scary threat, which I don't think they will be, I think this card's going to be pretty underwhelming. I'll have to give it a 1.5. Alright, next up we have Void Analyst. 2 mana 2/2 Death Rattle. Give all demons in your hand +1/+1. If this was Battle Cry, I think it would be a lot better. But because it's Death Rattle, you drop it on turn 2, and your opponent has to play something for you to trade into it in order to get value. Otherwise, late game 2 mana 2/2 buff all the demons in your hand can be very underwhelming. Yeah, so I think this card's pretty bad. I'm gonna have to give it a 1.5. Next up we have a Sephorium Bomber. 5 mana 5/5. Shuffle a bomb in your opponent's deck when trying explodes for 5 damage. So this basically, if this just read 5 mana 5/5, deal 5 damage to your opponent, it would be very good, right? I mean, you could just play an odd hunter. I mean, just 5 mana, deal 5, and you get a 5/5 body. That's extremely good. But because you don't know when the bomb will explode, and your opponent has probably, roughly between 5 and 10% chance of drawing it every turn, it's obviously not going to be that good. I have to give this guy 1.5. Next up, we have Luna's Pocket Galaxy. Change the cost of minions in your deck to 1. Whew, they're really making some very powerful cards this set. This card is extremely good. I looked through some cards. Obviously, we have Arcane Chantonitis, we have Malygos, we have Faceless Manipulator, we have Alec. I think it's going to be pretty easy to OTK your opponent. I think what's going to happen, or the downside with this is you have to draw it before you draw your minions. But I think this effect is powerful enough that you could build, you can very easily build around OTK Mage deck. I have to give this card a 4.0. Next up we have Dr. Morgan. 8 mana 5/5. Swap this with the minion in your deck. Death Rattle. Yeah, this card is just very underwhelming. I think the only appealing card with this is if you get the Alex. So you can shuffle more Dr. Morgans in your deck. And maybe prevent yourself from fatiguing. Also, I wonder what happens if you play Spirit Umbra and Dr. Morgan in the same turn, and the only other card in your deck is Dr. Morgan. So when you have Umbra in play and you summon a minion with Death Rattle, it triggers it, which would make Dr. Morgan go back in the deck and switch with another Dr. Morgan, which triggers go get the other Dr. Morgan, so on and so forth. So I'm wondering if that interaction would crash the game. Yeah, I don't think this card is that great. I think it might have some applications in some weird control warlocks that are just trying to prevent themselves from fatiguing. But I don't think this card is going to be worth it. I'll have to give it a 1.5. Next up we have Meteorologist. 6 mana 3/3. For each card in your hand, deal 1 damage to a random enemy. So most of the time you're going to have 4 to 5 cards in your hand as a mage. You could have, and even sometimes you have 0 cards. Sometimes you have as much as 10. That really only happens if you have a Luneth. But when you have so many cards in your hand, there's kind of a breaking point. Obviously, if you have 8 or 9 cards, or even 10, this card's going to be excellent to play. But if you only have 2 or 3 cards, this card's going to be pretty terrible to play. So I think for that reason, this card's pretty underwhelming. I don't think it'll be played in Tempo Mage. I'm going to have to give it a 1.5. Next up, we have Galvanizer. 2 mana 1 to reduce the cost of mechs in your hand by 1. So obviously this is not as good as Mech Warper. This does have the added benefit of permanently reducing the cost even if Galvanizer dies, whereas Mech Warper doesn't do that if it dies. But at least Mech Warper had a pretty good body. Galvanizer does not, and also it doesn't affect the draws of future mech minions. So I think this card is a little bit underwhelming. I'm not even sure if I'll make the cut in mech strategies. I'm going to have to give it a 2.5. Alright, next up we have the Stormbringer. 7 mana, transform your minions into random legendary minions. This card is extremely powerful. I think this card's very, very good. The only question is this card good enough to make token type shaman a valid strategy? We already have Unstable Mutation, and we have Thrall. We lost Doppelgangster and Evolve last expansion, so Evolve Shaman is kind of left with struggling to find out if it's going to be good enough. I'm not sure if this card alone will make it good enough. We did see the 1 mana 7/2/1/1s. So there are a few different ways to generate tokens in Shaman, so that might end up becoming a decent strategy. you know, the payoff is mostly just Bloodlust and Stormbringer and Thrall. Bloodlust and Stormbringer are kind of underwhelming. They kind of rely on the rest of your cards being very good. Whereas with the Stormbringer, you know you don't need your other cards to be good. You can just cast Stormbringer and just win the game on the spot. I think this card's extremely powerful, but I don't know if it'll be enough to make a Vol Shaman a strategy. I'm gonna have to give it a 4.0. And our last card is Prismatic Lens. Draw a minion and a spell from your deck. Swap their cost. This is a very interesting card. You can either make a strategy where you're trying to reduce the cost of your big minions, or you can make a strategy where you're trying to reduce the cost of your big spells. The only really two big spells that we have are Avenging Wrath and Lay on Hands. And I guess for big spells, or sorry, big minions, you can reduce anything from Lich King to Alexstrasza, or just really anything. I think you're going to be better off reducing the spells though, because let's say you put this in a mid-range / control type paladin. You're going to be running cards like Equality, Consecration. So there's already a few cards that are going to cost 2 or 4. If you run a second copy of Prismatic Lens. So I guess where I'm going with this, actually, now that I think about it, I didn't think this one all the way through. Yeah, I guess if you're playing Control Paladin, you're playing Equality and Prismatic Lens, it's going to be easier to reduce the cost of big minions. So I think in a Control type Paladin, this card will reduce the cost of big minions. But I think in a deck like Even Paladin, which runs Avenging Wrath and Consecration and Blessing, and runs a lot of 2-drops, it can reduce the cost of your Avenging Wrath, which can be pretty appealing. If you get a 2-mana Avenging Wrath and like a 6-mana 2-drop or whatever, I think that's pretty good. I think that's a good trade-off. You don't really care about the 2-drop being expensive, but having this Avenging Wrath, being able to go Equality, Avenging Wrath, and develop your board in the same turn is pretty powerful. Plus, this card is straight card advantage, right? I mean, you spend 4 mana and you get 2 cards from it. I mean, even if it didn't swap the cost, even if it just read 4 mana, draw a minion and a spell from your deck, I think it'd already be good. The swap the cost, I think, is just an added bonus and will help like promote deck creativity. So I'm a big fan of this card, just design wise and playability wise. I'm gonna have to give it a solid 3.0. And alright guys, it looks like that's going to be it for part 3. I think we still have 50 more cards to go, so expect part 4, maybe a part 5, and I'll see you guys for those. Peace.